Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependency podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. That is for being codependent. Now in your 20s, you're exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in crap relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. All right, today we have Tiffany McLain, LMFT, a private practice fee strategist, whose mantra is full fees are the new black. Via her program, the Lean In Make Bank Academy, she helps therapists ethically earn 30 to 50% more per month while seeing fewer clients by showing them how to think about and directly address fees in a clinically appropriate manner. Tiffany, how are you doing?
Well, I feel really good about myself after hearing you read that bio. I sound fancy.
You do. You sound fancy. Okay. Well, I did want to start. I was reflecting. I have a story to tell you. So for the listeners, I took Tiffany's Lean and Make Bank course. And I remember when I talked with, there was a interview application check-in before we started LIM with Sarah Coincraft. And I remember she said, like, the last question was, is there anything Tiffany and I should know beforehand before the course? And I said, Sarah, I'm codependent. And I need to be vigilant about my adherence to the course. And if I genuinely want to do and follow it, or if I'm really just trying to please you and Tiffany, I have to be very mindful of that. And I kicked ass in the course. So I guess my codependency or adherence to wanting to please people, it has benefits.
That's exactly right. I never heard that interview, or at least that part. And I think you're right. I mean, sometimes being codependent can serve us if we pick the right people want to please. Until we can work our way out of it, you might as well use it to your advantage.
Right. Yes. Well, yeah, I think that's part of what this podcast is about. We can't just be totally independent islands. We're eventually going to have to transform our codependency into something more useful, right? To create better lives for ourselves and choosing when and where and how we want to please others and ourselves.
I for those of you who can't see Marissa's face, you just put out a brilliant thought while you weren't sure that how brilliant that thought was going to be. But I think it's right on point in our program, and you know this. The very first module is about who we surround ourselves with. And so if you're going to be a people pleaser, which guess what? Almost all therapists are, a lot of women are, a lot of women in relationships are. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, yes, preach.
Yeah, well, so I'm just going to say, be thoughtful about who you surround yourself with. Because if you're going to default to pleasing people until you start catching it and are able to make changes, if that's your default, surround yourself with people who are inspiring you in how they live, who are motivating you to step it up, and who you feel good being around, who allow you to feel good and confident and fabulous, if that's a word we're going to use, fabulous in the life you live day to day.
Right. Please those people.
Yeah.
Not shitty, alcoholic, homeless boyfriends.
That's exactly right. We're going right to it. Yeah.
Who I dated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Just line them up. Okay.
Oh.
Well, Tiffany, how would you describe codependency for yourself? Right? This mumbo jumbo term.
Sure. I mean, I don't think a lot in terms of codependency, but were we to go down the list of what it means to be codependent, I think I would fit a lot of those buckets. I recently heard a podcast actually a podcast by Nick Bogner, who you know, and he's going to be on this podcast soon. He was interviewing a woman. She was talking about having grown up in an alcoholic family system. And she described something that really stood out to me, which is for a long time in her life, and still her default is when somebody asks her something about herself, or somebody proposes an idea and sees what she thinks about it, her very first thought is to find out what they want and how they want her to be and go with that. So our default is, what can we do to please the other person before we can even check in or know to check in with, oh, wait, what do I want to do here? What's my gut say? What am I interested in? That's how I think about codependency.
Yeah. Just this automatic knee-jerk reaction. Hey, how are you? What does this person need me to say? How can I please them in my response? Absolutely. Like, oh, okay, this guy, he's rushed. He wants me to be quick. This person is hinting at something. Maybe I should take this hint. Right? Just really just being hyper obsessive about, or just that's what you think about.
That's I just feel like I just had a mini therapy session right there. Like, you even captured it in the how subtle it is to pick up, oh, this person's rushed, I need to be faster. This person's really slow, let me be slow. Just even in how we're communicating, really stepping into the other person's shoes, looking at what they want and responding from there without, again, even being in touch with what we want, how we think, right, where we're at.
Right. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, can you reflect back and tell us a story of when you felt codependent in your 20s, college, career, starting out?
Can I reflect back to last month when I was 40 and felt codependent? Or do you want a 20s? Do you want me to go way back as if I don't still have those tendencies now?
Let's do both and.
Okay. It's harder to think about my 20s. So to be frank, in my 20s, I was largely dissociated. I now have a psychoanalytic background. So for those who don't know, that means I work with therapists, and as a therapist, I work paying attention to the unconscious parts of ourselves, the parts that we don't even know are there, but that are really impacting our day-to-day lives and our day-to-day decisions. So I really reflect on the family I came from, which, again, I didn't know the word codependent, but a lot of it was, what do you need? How do I operate to keep everything smooth? What do I need to do to make sure you're happy and you're okay? So stepping out of that family system, really interestingly, going off to college and then moving out of state, I think I was really a wash, because I didn't have that system. So I don't know what the new rules are. So every single person I met, I think in some way, I was stepping into their shoes and being who they needed me to be. And I did not have a core sense or a connection to myself. So how much time do you have? Every day, every minute of every day, I was out of connection with myself and working to anticipate the needs of others and meet those needs, for better or for worse.
Mm-hmm. Right. So here you are. This is interesting. So you're making me think about, Tiffany had a conversation, 2021 is the year where you're the redwood tree.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. But in your early 20s, I don't know, you're just what is that called? Those things that roll around in the road in the desert?
Oh, tumbleweed. You know what I think about? You know how I think about it? I often pictured myself in one of two ways, either as a balloon floating with just one string that's not tethered to anything, or this is really strange, but a pea-sized cork floating in the middle of the ocean. So really, in both of those, no connection or groundedness to anything, just a wash and alone. I think that was my experience in much of my 20s.
Right. And no core.
No core. Well, let me actually give myself a little more credit. There were lines, but I think even knowing that I had boundaries, or knowing that there were things I wanted that were different than what these people around me wanted, was dangerous. So I think when I in my gut came upon a line that really was a line for me, I would do something that probably looked crazy or looked manic to get out of it. So I was able to get out of it, but really had to make sure I'm bad. I'm an idiot. What a fool I am to do this crazy thing, but it kept me safe. So at the end of the day, I had a line that was able to keep myself safe. Even though it had to be that, had to get that far before I was able to kick it and protect myself, whatever that looked like, either emotionally or physically.
Right. Yeah, no, I talk about in a previous episode, my codependency came up a lot in my 20s where I would really please men. Just, if you were a man, I was going to try and please you and be charismatic, cute, comforting. And there was a 75-year-old male in a meditation group that I went to. And yeah, he would take me out to dinner and provide his wisdom and mentorship. And he kept inviting me to dinner, and he'd talk about his marriage. He was married 50 years and had kids and grandkids. But like, he started texting me late, and like, we started going to dinner fairly frequently. And there were like, I remember one time he like looked me like up and down, and I was like, ooh. Right. But it took this extreme, which was after a Valentine's Day meditation we went to. He tried to kiss me. And yeah, I was like, ugh! And I like screamed his name, and I ran to my car. I never went to any meditation ever again. Right. So this extreme line. But yeah, I missed out on those meditations, and had to yeah, I just ghosted all the other nice people there because right, it just had to get to that extreme for me to finally push back. So
Let me ask you this. This is a beautiful, poignant example of exactly what we're talking about. I was watching some documentary about the guy who started Bikram yoga, who founded it in America. Same kind of thing where he would have all of these followers, and eventually some of them would end up in a situation where, oh no, either they end up having sex with him, they don't want to, but got that far, or they barely got out of, like, oh man. And so people who don't operate this way, listen, people maybe who are listening, although if you're listening, I imagine you resonate with this, but for folks
right.
who don't operate this way, they might hear that story and say, really, Marissa, or Tiffany, I could be plugged into that story too. Really, Marissa, when you were going out to dinner and he was texting you late at night, you didn't have any inkling that it was a romantic intention. What would you say about that to those people?
Yes, I had the inkling, and also my need to please overrode that. Like, who cares if you're uncomfortable, Marissa? There's this mantra too, like, that I since defined my 20s. I will be uncomfortable, so you will be comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, just let me just bend over backwards, fold up like a pretzel. I'll lay down like a doormat. Just please be comfortable.
And I think, I don't know how you feel about this, the more I'm learning about myself in my 2 times a week analysis, and really seeing like how deeply embedded these things are. Even though I'm now 40, I'm a parent, I have a successful business, I'm largely able to be in touch with myself much more. There are still many circumstances where I go unconscious and dissociate from the part of myself that knows, and I fall into this pattern, and I'm completely unaware that I'm doing it until it's reached a fever pitch. And so I think there's something about not only pleasing people just because we want to be pleasing, but I think it's something about having experienced an environment where it was dangerous not to please people. So our automatic response is, we need to be pleasing. We need to make sure this person feels okay so that no harm comes to me. And I think that's a big part of this too, that other folks who haven't experienced this don't understand.
Right. Yeah, I sense if I had texted him something back, if I had said, "The fuck are you looking at?" he could have gotten angry, dismissive, responded with sarcasm, right? Any kind of hurt. And that's more threatening in the moment in my imagination than it is to send a funny haha text back.
Yeah, that's right. Keep him safe and happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about this 40
The what?
codependent experience.
The last month experience? Absolutely. And so here's something that shifted since I've had my son. He's almost 2. It has been striking to see how I will not for one moment waver if it comes to him, his safety, and that could even be a little safety. So the things that I was not able to or had to work really hard to do for myself, um, that is not even a question when it comes to protecting him. So that's really forced me, one, to become aware of this codependent. I didn't even know how strong it was until I had a oppositional force, which is him. um, so it's forced me to have to say no, or quote unquote reject other people, or make decisions that go against what other people want constantly, in a way that before I would tolerate it or talk myself out of it or say I don't really know, or it doesn't really matter to me. Now things matter to me unequivocally. And so he was in a daycare with a woman, and there were a lot of little things. And I'm like, it's not the best, but good enough. It's not the best, but good enough.
Mhm.
One day, my partner went to pick him up, and there was a man at the house who was her son-in-law, and he was putting up a Christmas tree or something. And so for me, if there's a licensed daycare and a daycare provider, and I've met the people who are supposed to be there, if there's suddenly a man there who I've never met, that's a problem. And so that was a
Right.
situation where I was unequivocal. I don't care what her reason is. I mean, if it was a plumber, okay. But if it's, I don't know, if this is her son-in-law, how often is he at the house? Why was I never informed? And so um, I was unequivocal. He's not going back. And I felt so bad. This is an older woman, like a Russian Jew. So I just feel like a
Mm.
grandmother, so sweet, so kind, so just like naive to the world and wanting to love the children kind of attitude. And I just felt like a terrible person for taking this little boy away who she loved. And I really, while I stood my ground, I realized how much I made it about me being bad. Oh, it's because of my trauma, and oh, I don't know that men are safe, and my background is so terrible. As opposed to saying, "Who is this man at your house?" Oh, my son-in-law. Does he have access? And I did find out he had. He was one of the people on the list of who could be at the daycare.
Mm.
Why was that not revealed to me when I was vetting the daycare? Nobody ever said, oh, and here's these other people who are allowed to be on the premises. So as opposed to saying, well, that's a problem, why didn't you reveal that in the initial consultation? I should have known that this guy has access and I want to meet him. Rather than doing all that, just clear and kindly and firmly, I went into this whole complex, ridiculous email exchange about my upbringing that made it unsafe. And I'm like, why? I don't want to be doing all of that. So it was interesting to see how clear and firm I was, unequivocal about my son's not going back. Done. I'll find a way.
Right.
He'll be at home for 3 weeks, and we'll have to make do. But he's safe. And how much I made it. I'm crazy, and I'm sure this is unusual. And you've done everything perfect, um, in order to spare her feelings or whatever I imagined. So that was a really shocking regression into that kind of
Right.
codependent thing that caught me off guard.
Right. So even in the boundary making, even in the unequivocal,
Yes.
right? I am not exposing him to the same, but I'm going to feel the same as I'm doing it.
Exactly right.
I
Exactly
am
right.
going to question and doubt
Yes.
and rethink and email exchange it. Just, ugh.
Into the
Mhm.
ground. And it really took my analyst and also my partner, although he also was pleasing. So he went back and forth. But his first response was like, when I sent this email, and her response was her daughter responded, who also was part of the daycare, and was like, my mom is crying. How could you send an email? And my email was actually very kind. How could you send an email? She's heartbroken. She can't believe it. And I was like, oh no, I've destroyed this poor old woman. And my partner's response was, she sounds like a crazy person. I'm like, oh yeah, a professional provider would say, we're so sorry. This clearly had an impact on you. Let's get on the phone and have a discussion about what our policies are and what we can do to make it right. Right? There's a million, but my first is like, I've destroyed her. And my analyst also pointed out, that was not a very professional response on their part. You're their client. They're supposed to help you feel safe with your child. I'm like, oh yeah, like it takes other people to remind me. Their job is to where you are and try to understand your point of view, especially when you're paying them to keep your son safe, not the way around. It was just striking.
Right. Right. And I sense even in that email was an invitation Tiffany, will you please take responsibility and ownership for my mother's emotions? Can you please be codependent? Right? Like,
Oh my gosh,
codependence,
yes.
we are like, other people's problem is my problem. And she's saying,
Yes.
this is your problem. You're like, oh my God, it might be.
It is. And it
It
was,
is.
but also, I don't have, it doesn't have to be, but my codependent, when this stuff stirs up, it becomes, and then I was able, of course, in hindsight to see like, oh, they were planting the seeds. I think about cult leaders, again, unconscious, but like grooming me all along to not see what I see and not feel what I feel. So I'm like, wow, even how even the little things that are like, really, they are good enough. But like he would have splinters in his hand sometimes. And I'd be like, hey, he has these splinters. Well, I don't know where those came from. And having to come many times, oh well, he crawls outside. Again, I'm being a little more harsh than she was because she was very sweet. Oh, he must be crawling around. But it's like, yeah, okay, so acknowledge the splinters and do something about it, as opposed to somehow it's his fault for crawling when he's a baby. Or don't bring it to our attention, maybe. So all of those little things where I'm like, okay, that doesn't feel great, but it's okay. But also like, well, oh, those are indicators of something else. It's not just about that. They're indicators of something else. Little kids are going to play, little kids are going to get splinters, of course. But when we bring it to their attention and it's kind of like, that's not my problem, that's on you. Your emotions are the problem here. It's like, oh yeah, shoot, this is that thing.
Mm-hmm. I love that grooming, those nightly texts, those dismissals, just right. We're like, we question. Now at 40, you draw a boundary way sooner. There's no manic, like, get the hell away from my baby.
Yes.
There's just like, hey, here's this email.
Yeah.
We will not be back. But it's there, right?
Yeah.
This ignoring the signs.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. That's right.
Well, you are a therapist. You're a woman. You're a female
Correct.
therapist. You work with a majority of female therapists. How have you seen codependency in the women that you help strategize their fees?
It is everywhere. It is all of it. So I'm a woman, I'm a therapist, I'm also Black, biracial. So it's interesting because my program is about I'll say our program because I'm not the only one in it now. Can people know that you also are a mindset mentor in that program? Yeah, Marissa is a mentor in that program. Thank you very much with her. So by the way, folks, you went from meeting me about a year ago, no, September of a year and a little over a year ago, to getting in my program, friggin' blowing it out of the water, and then coming to work for us in the program like a baller. So whatever, again, if it's your codependency, it's working for you. So
Using
it's working for you. The program is about helping therapists earn more in private practice, but so many people get in the program and they're like, holy mackerel, this is also forcing me to reconsider my boundaries in every single aspect of my life. Because our practices, therapist practices, whatever work you do, it's a reflection of how you're relating to other people and what your attachments are generally. So if, our therapists come in and they privilege the client's needs or even fantasized needs over their own, so that you might have, and this is a story we hear all the time, where a therapist is not paying off their student loans, has no 401k at all, no financial safety cushion, doesn't go on vacation, but they're giving a sliding scale to their clients who are going on vacation and have a wonderful 401k plans and have health insurance. So this therapist is like giving what they don't even have to someone who doesn't actually need it, all to avoid the potential of the person being mad or sad or feeling betrayed or whatever else the therapist is afraid that this person might experience if the therapist actually says, oh, my fee's $200. Take it or leave it. It's on you. That's what I need to live well. That's what I need to take care of myself. Now you make the choice. Instead, they say, my fee is $200, but what can you afford? What feels okay for you? Is that okay? Right. So this very same codependent thing we're talking about is being played out in their business lives.
Right. And when you launch the course, because I've heard therapists on your podcast, the money sessions, and I think like that, they would say, I realized I was codependent. I mean, did you know that you were going to be addressing this as part of your course?
I had a some years ago now. One of the ways I work also as a therapist. I'm about to close my practice, but in the years I've been doing therapy, one of the foundational tenets that I believe as a therapist is that in order for my clients to grow, I'm going to have to grow and come to know things about myself, about the world that I didn't know before. So taking on a client is a risk because I'm going to have to change in order to help them change. So I
Right.
once had a client who I said, just off the cuff, something about, oh, well, you're codependent. It's never a thing I talked about before. It's not really the framework that I use, but it was just clear as day. and, and then it was in what unfolded after that. I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I've been working with this person for years and we've been playing out this dynamic that's actually pretty codependent on my part. And that's when I was also like, holy mackerel, what is this codependency thing? Clearly, this applies to me as well. And of course, every client who I see in some way has those tendencies. And I had been fostering them unawares, the same thing, like over functioning. If they're going to miss a session, really making sure that I can make available another session, or saying, you got to really let me know ahead of time, as opposed to letting them change a schedule, take the hit if they have to cancel, pay, show up for their session on time. Like those, I realized all the ways I was doing their work for them in a
Right.
codependent way. And I didn't realize it until that moment.
Right. So if you spot it, you got it.
That's right.
Right. So you were pointing the finger,
Yeah.
and there were 3 pointing back at you.
That's right.
You were like, oh my God.
That's right.
And you did mention, right, the way that you work with clients through this psychoanalytic framework. I mean, what do you sense psychoanalysis has to say about codependency?
Holy mackerel. Wow. So here's the thing about psychoanalysis. It's like you take one concept like codependency and you the thing that psychoanalysis doesn't like to do really is give a word to a thing. They want to examine and pull apart and really find out what the F are we all saying? What are the dynamics at play? What are the identifications? What are the traumas that are culminating in this thing we call codependency? So I imagine if
Right.
we were to start thinking or having a discussion about codependency from a psychoanalytic lens, you'd have 100,000 pages of psychoanalytic articles, all of them with different terms and words. But here's what I can say. There was an article I read a few weeks ago, and this was fantastic. And I think it lines right up with the idea of codependency. My analyst gave it to me, which is, well, usually an analyst giving an article, that's not usually how she works, but she got excited. This article is called Airless Worlds and had some kind of longer title after that. And the as clear as I can make it, what this author was saying is that folks who, they don't describe it as codependent, but folks who have this tendency that you and I are calling codependency, from the time we were being formed, like the youngest, earliest time, baby age, our primary identification was with the other's experience of us. So we formed our thoughts and ourselves are formed based on how the other is experiencing us. So there's not, and it's called airless worlds, is because there's not even a breath between it. There's not even, I just got goosebumps. There's not even a breath between, oh, this person needs me to be this way and I'm going to be, it's like, I am. And so this can be on a spectrum from more rigid to less rigid. So it can be in little ways, but like, really what it's talking about is at our core, there's not an identity outside of your experience of me. So that's one example, I think, of thousands of ways this type of experience is talked about in psychoanalytic literature.
Right. One thing I posted about it on Instagram, you're making me think. One way I describe codependency is being a Siamese twin. Right? So here's this like airless words, like you're just like the other person is in, on, next to, connected with, shares the same organs as
Yes.
you.
Yeah. You're an extension. You're just an extension of them
Yeah.
and the experience of us. And it really, thinking about there's a word I keep not being able to get to for some reason, but really, even thinking about the level of disturbance in the caregiver, not saying they're bad, but their own trauma, they can't actually see the child except as an extension of them. So the child only comes to know themselves as an extension of the parent. And the work it takes as a psychoanalyst, as a therapist, to slowly help a patient start being able to come to know themselves outside of being an extension of another, that's, that's a lifetime. That's a lifetime
Right.
of work.
Right. Being that balloon that tethers to something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That little cork finding a wine bottle to cap. Right? These Siamese twin getting separation surgery and living.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Those are big tasks.
And one of the struggles of it, especially you're a therapist, it can be so insidious and so confusing because the client may seem to be making gains and we're like, yeah, they're finally coming to know themselves. Only it comes to realize, oh, they're now mirroring us. And it seems like they're making gains, but now we've become the person who they're an extension of. So to even start teasing that apart is like, holy mackerel, there's another 10 years. And I know a lot of people complain about the idea of being in therapy forever. But when we're talking about foundational change from people who have spent 2 years being formed in a petri dish that is dysfunctional or disturbed, that shit does not get unwound in 6 sessions or less. So it's just the reality that if we're going to undo these primary identifications and ways of functioning in the world, that shit takes time.
Right. Yeah. Even, I mean, the 20 somethings listening to this, 30 somethings, I'm like, girl, if you've been codependent for over a decade, for 2 decades,
3,
it's going to take a little more than a month to get over this.
That's right.
Right? They're like, come on, Marissa, work your magic. And I'm like, girl,
right.
It's okay. It's, I see your urgency. I see how miserable it is. You've coped with it this long. It's going to take a minute for you to tether, find your cork, separate from your Siamese twin.
And I think that's what makes you and therapists like you powerful, because you're not promising a quick fix. You're not pretending like this is something that can be solved in 6 weeks or even 6 months. You're honest with them about the fact that this stuff runs deep and it takes time and presence in order to help them come to not only find themselves, but in many cases actually create oneself, because that's not even that core has not been allowed to happen as they were coming up.
Yeah. I remember there's a movie, Spanglish, and the girl, she's like writing her college application essay and she ends it. And it's like a happy ending of the movie. But she says, I am my mother's daughter. And I was like
that's awful. Ending.
It's awful. It's awful.
Shoot.
Yeah. Damn,
you got it wrong, Spanglish.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's see. Let's talk a little more about, so you've noticed codependency in your practice. You've noticed codependency in your life. And you weren't expecting to work on this with therapists who joined LIM. What is it like hearing it over and over and over again?
I love it. And I know for some of the coaches or people who are, I don't know, in the program, it could be like, oh, this is coming up again. But for me, I'm like, wow. One, the impact when people are able to recognize it and make changes. And two, one of the reasons I love teaching this program is because I'm like, oh, that's still me. Again, just like with clients, if I'm really going to help people, I have to change. And if I'm with people who aren't making changes, or who are even students who are having the same experience over and over again, maybe this is codependent. I'm like, it's my job to see what could be done differently to help them. And that's actually been something that has changed. And you've witnessed this change over the past in 2020. I used to be so over functioning even for my students in the program.
Right.
I'd call them sometimes. They would buy this $2,000 or $2,400 program, and then they wouldn't even log in. And I would be like emailing them, where are you at? You got to log in. I really want everyone to succeed. And I really had to, I have a coach who's very boundaried. And she said something that's really struck me, which is I to her students, I am responsible to you. I am not responsible for you. And that blew my mind, right? That blew my mind, because I was like, Marissa just did a pen drop for those of you.
Yes. Mic drop. We'll drop the mic.
Before I go on, what about that struck you? What about that idea strikes you?
Your coach's family of origin. How did she do that? How did she get there? And right, I sense so many of us, therapists, women, codependents alike, we have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded to be responsible for that. This like responsible to, we're like, what is that? What? Who? Other people get to do that, but there's no. Yeah, it's this myth.
Yeah.
This alternate reality.
It really, like when she first said it, it struck me like it struck you, like, what? And it took me, even later, I think someone was asking, well, what does that even mean? I'm like, oh yeah, what does that mean actually? But the sentiment, I felt the sentiment. And then as I started teasing it apart to see, well, what's that look like as a teacher? What's that look like as a consultant? It's like, I create a program that has everything you need to succeed. And if I see 20% of the people struggling with the same thing, oh, that lets me know I need to make a tweak in the course or add an extra resource. But if I give you everything you need and you're not doing the things we say to move forward, attending all the calls, going through the framework, setting aside 5 minutes a day to follow through with what we're saying, that's not my responsibility. I'm responsible to give you all the resources you need to succeed. And you're responsible to use those resources and to come to us and ask for help whenever you're stuck. So really taking that out of like, I'm not chasing every single person around. I'm not giving every person a phone call. I'm giving you all the materials you need to succeed. And then from there, it's your responsibility to take action. That blew my mind. And it's also really allowed me to up-level my business, to show up and model this to my students, and also to be able to spend my resources finding more folks, creating better material, being able to train our coaches or hire employees. But as long as I was mired in every single student and holding their hand and pulling up their pants and wiping their diaper, I can't actually grow a business.
Mm-hmm. What were you picturing? Right? What if a student doesn't log on for a month? What if, what's the image that you were like, oh God, got to get him in or else?
I still feel it even as you're talking. And you know that there were students who even maybe had complaints about the program. And I'm like, oh, really? I even call a student, even just, 8 months ago, call a student just to check in, and the student was still dissatisfied. Just no matter what I went over and above for this one particular student because of my own stuff, over and above, and the student was still like, whereas I had 50 other people who were effing stepping up and taking action, and really, and I'm like, oh, what am I doing? So I definitely have a feeling of, it's my fault. They paid for this. They really should be using it, and so I need to do more to get them to use it. Everybody comes from their own background of struggle, and they really need a hand to hold. And if I'm not that hand, just all of these stories and guilt. And I'll tell you this, I often now really think about this even in terms of projection. When we're being codependent, I think a lot of times we're thinking back to when we needed help and there wasn't someone to help us, and we didn't have the strength in ourselves to move forward. So even then we're looking, as much as we conform to other people, the flip side of that is we are looking for other people to conform for us and do things for us and make things easier for us. And we get mad or envious or resentful when people aren't holding our hand and pulling us up. So I had to also start thinking about, where are the areas in my life where I'm looking for other people to do something for me and making excuses for not moving forward. And the more I get clear about that, like, oh, it's my job to take responsibility. It's my job to figure this stuff out. The more I can look out in the world and be like, oh yeah, you can do that too. If I've come to where I've come in life and continue, if I'm pushing myself how I've continued to push myself, you can effing do that too, friend. So it's allowed me to be more firm and also have more belief and confidence in other people's ability as well as my own.
Right. Your problem is your problem. My problem is my problem.
Absolutely.
We all have our problems to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
But just,
I'm not going to ask you to hold mine, and I'm not going to hold yours either.
Right. And I can't let the image of you being disappointed, dissatisfied. I think, yeah, that stood out. Dissatisfied. Oh, she's still dissatisfied. I can't. That's her dissatisfaction.
That's right. And she might need to be. My therapist pointed out a really great point that some people actually need their dissatisfaction more than they need to improve. They actually need that thing. And so that also helped me realize, oh, that person needs to be dissatisfied. That's a journey that they are nurturing and harboring and watering that dissatisfaction in other people. That has nothing to do with me, actually. That's something they need to do until they don't need to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right? Just like, Codependents are like, what if I dance like this?
That's right.
What if I jiggy like that?
That's your like, okay, TikTok. You got to make a reel about that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. This is one of the funner, more fun podcast interviews I've done. So thank you.
We'll say funner, right?
Funner?
We're codependent dummies.
This is the funnerest conversation I had in a while, Marissa.
Funner-ing. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. And we'll catch everybody next time.
Beautiful. That's a wrap.
Hey, sis. It's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster. I'm a quote podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. And know this. If you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you feel like you don't matter, know that you matter to me. Until next time, be sure to check out codependummy.com for more info about today's episode, my free course, and other resources. Take care. You're still here? Just kidding. Girl, this is not therapy, and I'm not your therapist, okay? This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the publisher, or the guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you want or need a professional, you should find one.